although they've reviewed this material, I think it's important to note that what you're going to see today is the interpretations and the opinions of Purepoint. They don't necessarily reflect everything that Cameco and Areva believe or their opinions, but by and large, I think we all see this as something very positive for all of us collectively moving forward, and that we want to better understand as a group. I will mention today, because we've got a number of people on the line, that we won't be taking questions at the end. However, we will give you information to submit questions to us, and we will get back to everybody as quickly as possible, and we'll actually disseminate those questions and those answers sometime in the next week to everybody who's participating today. So, as a starting point, I think we're going to start from the macro view and take a look here at northern Saskatchewan and the Athabasca Basin, and just some quick definitional discussion as to the geology here. The Athabasca Basin, for those of you who I'm sure most are aware, but many might not be, is really a bowl in the Canadian Shield that's full of sandstone, and the deposits that have been found over the years are, for the most part, being found in and around the bottom of that bowl. But over the years, there's been a lot of new discoveries and a lot of new understandings about these deposits and where they live and how they're found. In this particular map you're looking at now, what we're talking about and looking at are the various lithostructural domains. Excuse me. On the right-hand side, you see in purple the Mujatic domain in the north and the south that runs through the basin, and then just right of that you see the Wollaston domain. And by and large, where we see all of the deposits that historically have been found in the basin sorry, we're getting ahead of ourselves here. On the right-hand side, they tend to have been found in that transition zone between those two domains. Now, one of the things we do a lot of in the basin is geophysical surveys, and this map that we're about to move to, hang on a minute, there we go. It's a geophysical survey that it's a total magnetic, and what it allows us to do is effectively see through that sandstone and look at the rock structure and the rock type that are beneath the sandstone, and we get a more accurate picture of these domains and how they extend through the basin. So now, as we look over on the right-hand side there, where the Mujatic and the Wollaston come together, it's that association between that contact that we align with those deposits. Within the Mujatic, you see the blue, which is a magnetic low, which is associated with the sediments that are somewhat overlaying more of the granitic rock, which is the pinker zones that you see. And that blue area, as it comes up to the transition zone, is you see it more of a circular pattern. Whereas on the other side, on the Wollaston, where we're looking at again those blue zones, there's more of a linear fabric to it. So it's that transition that we're looking for. And if we take that observation over to the left-hand side of the map, and in particular the Patterson uranium area that we're looking at in the box, again, we're looking at where those domains come together, and we appear to see that association again between here the Clearwater and the Wollaston domains. Now, if we're going to zoom in on that particular box in that area, and we see where these two domains come together, it's quite evident and quite obvious that the findings of the past 5 years, all of those deposits, those showings, are lining up along that transition. I want to point out that the dark black line that we've drawn there is that transition isn't so much a line as a zone. So it's a much broader zone within that. That line represents a specific geological shift that we see when we're looking at this between the two. But what's more important is the direction and the alignment of these deposits. There we go. The other thing I'll point out, because we'll be coming back to this, is along the bottom you see that dotted line, which represents the edge of the basin. So that's the edge of where the sandstone stops, and we come out of the basin. And certainly what's been new in recent years, and certainly with the Triple R deposit and the Arrow deposit for the most part, is there's now a greater understanding of what deposits and what mineralization can lie outside of the basin, which historically wasn't felt to be the case. So and now I want to take a look at some of the work that we do and how we define, how we all define targets in the area. And what you're seeing here is the overlay, in this case, of 5 different airborne geophysical surveys, in this case, electromagnetic surveys. And what these surveys are looking for is conductive indications along the line. So as an airplane or a helicopter is flying along these lines, they're picking up particularly conductive spots. We've taken all of this data, and Roger Watson, our geophysicist, has taken all this data and actually analyzes it on a point-by-point basis to determine where that conductivity is occurring and at what strength and in what direction it's happening. And what that's allowing us to do is identify the graphitic rock that is in the basement. And that graphitic rock represents a primary target when we're looking for uranium. Historically, almost all of the deposits that have been found in the basin are in some way, shape, or form associated with that graphite. And this is the best way that we've found of identifying where that graphite is. So here we've got, as I said, the 5 airborne surveys that we've overlaid. In addition to that, though, there's also been groundwork done. Same survey, but it's being taken on the ground, mainly because as we get deeper into the basin and there's more sandstone cover, this is a more effective way of finding those spots of conductivity. So this is the process we've gone through. Actually, we've been going through this for quite some time, but more recently we've been able to package it all up together and take more of a single look at these particular targets and how they're created. What we do once we've got all of these points identified is we can start to join them up and find out where they're associated. And what they create are these lines, which are the graphitic rock primarily in the basement, and how they form along. In this particular case, there is quite an abundance of these conductors, which, although they run all throughout the basin, it's rare to see them in such a cluster like this. And you can see the same sort of lineage, the same sort of direction of how they flow, and it's from this that we start to identify where the most appropriate targets are for drilling. Now the background, as I mentioned before, is a magnetic map. We're going to now change that background. It's a similar map. It is still magnetic, but it's called a tilt derivative. And what it allows us to do is really more acutely define the edges of the different rock type and where those magnetic lows and highs change. And as we put all of this information together, we start to get a much clearer picture of where the most appropriate targets are for drilling. So that's how we've kind of come to this place and what we're looking for. And as we start to band the commonalities of the conductors, as we start to look at them within the different rock types, we haven't created, but it has been created, the boundaries of what we call the Patterson Corridor. And this corridor was actually identified and proposed by Cameco back in 2001. And there, in fact, were 3 corridors identified and defined. There's the Carter Corridor to the north, and the Dirksen Corridor to the south. But they're all bounded and grouped in geological commonality, and this is really the area that we've all been focused on, that we're now calling the Patterson District. Now I'm going to change this one more time, and we're going to go look at, we're just going to put it on a simple topography map. And what I want to start talking about now is is a lot of the historic work that's been done that actually brought us to this area. There's actually been a lot more work done historically in this area that's kept this area of interest for decades now. That work has been, we've been utilizing it today, as a matter of fact, even to help advance our understanding of the area. I'll start here. Back in 1978, SMDC and in 1988, Rio Algom did a lake sediment sampling across the entire area. And what you see here in pink are all the different sample spots that were taken right across the district. And from that, they were able to identify those uranium anomalies across the basin or across this region that you see here in pink. And of course now today we can look at these and see how they kind of line up with what we know. But it was from these anomalies that SMDC was starting to set up drill targets. And it was back in 1978 when SMDC drilled DER-04 on the Dirksen corridor. You see it there on the right. And they hit 0.28% uranium over 2.3 meters. The other hole that they drilled at that time, where they had a discovery, was right in the Patterson corridor, and you'll see it there in that box. And in 1980, they drilled a PAT-04. And I'm going to zoom in on that area and show you. It's the northeastern shoreline, I guess, of Patterson Lake. And what SMDC did at that time is they did a ground electromagnetic survey over the entire area. You can see some of the, or you can see the lines, the test lines. And what's important to note here is, as you see the black lines coming in, the graphitic conductors, those targets, you can see where they offset along a fault there. So those two lines, that conductor is broken at some point and been pulled apart and offset. The other thing you see here is this flat line EM conductor, that pink area. And what that represents is a broader zone of conductivity that was taken during the test. And all of this really identifies a complex area of geology where there may or may not be mineralization. SMDC drilled a dozen holes in that area, and through that they discovered PAT-04, which had 105 ppm of uranium per U over 4.2 meters. And that's really when this started to open up for a lot of folks out there in the Patterson Lake area. The next thing I want to look at historically is boulder sampling. And I think a lot of us are aware of the boulder sampling that led fission to the Triple R deposit. But in fact, there has been boulder sampling done over this entire area. Back in '96, Uranus did quite an extensive sampling. And in 2005, ESO as well did a fair amount of sampling. And what came out of that, in particular, was boron. They weren't necessarily mapping the uranium, but what they were mapping was boron. And the reason boron was important is that it turned out to be a highly important indicator mineral at McArthur River and at Key Lake. A fair amount of boron found with those deposits. So as they were finding that boron in the boulders, that's what they were chasing back in order to define where areas of interest would be. And as a result of that, Uranus staked about 70,000 hectares of project in that area, and you can see it outlined there in blue. And a lot of that property still is part of the Hook Lake project, and as well the Denison ALX and chemical projects to the north. So, more recently, we're talking about discoveries. We can start in the southwestern edge of the Patterson Lake corridor. In 2011, Fission and ESO, their joint venture, discovered a fairly significant radioactive boulder train. It was through the chasing of those boulders that they were able to, in 2012, make their discovery at Triple R. which has now turned into a very significant resource. North of that, NextGen Energy was following up again on all of the work that was being done and made their discovery of the Arrow deposit. And you can see, again, I'm just going to point out the dotted line that indicates the edge of the known basin. Arrow is right at that edge of that basin. In 2014, the Hook Lake joint venture made their discovery at Spitfire, our discovery at Spitfire. And I want to focus in on that box for a moment just to kind of show you what we were looking for at the time. Here you see the Spitfire discovery, 0.32% over 6.2 meters. And in fact, what we were doing at that time was following up on PAT04, which was the SMDC find down to the south there. What we knew was that conductor, that structure, if you will, was mineralized, and it was that mineralization that we were following up on when we were doing our drilling there in the north on that conductor. In 2015, NextGen then was following up on PAT04. They made their Bow discovery. They drilled, I think, about a dozen holes down there in that area. They came up with their discovery of 0.2% over 9.5 meters. And then finally, not finally actually, but at the beginning of this year, we again hit another discovery hole to the north, further north, 10.3% over 10 meters. And you can see that what we were looking for, what we were focusing on at that time, again, was that offset in the conductor and that break in the underlying structure that indicated an area of complexity where there may be a proper trap for mineralization. And then a few months ago, finally, NextGen made yet another discovery following up on that trend and on that particular conductor, mineralization over 17 meters just south of Spitfire. Now that sort of brings us up to date in terms of the work and the discovery and the history of why we're there and how we're there. What we want to do now is look at this from a bit of a different perspective. We're going to tilt the perspective of this map so that we've got it running squarely along there in front of us. And what this is going to allow us to do is also share with you sort of a cross-section of that area. Let me explain what you're about to see here, what you're looking at. In the top part of this slide, you're looking at the corridor, obviously. In it, we can see on the left, you see that's the Triple R deposit. In the center, we see the NextGen Energy's Arrow deposit. And then off to the right, we see the other discoveries, NextGen and Hook Lake discoveries as well. And the most important thing right now on this slide is the pink line. The pink line represents what we've interpreted as being the primary shear. And when I say primary shear, we're really looking at this as the priority target because we've been able to associate all of the known mineralization to date to that particular structure and that particular conductor. That is not to say that the surrounding conductors, the other black lines, are not targets. They, in fact, are very important targets, and we all need to do a fair amount of work in following up on those. But right now, what we feel is the priority is this one shear where really we can associate all of the mineralization to. The one anomaly here that's interesting is the Arrow deposit in the center. Because if you look at it, you will see that it's not actually sitting on the primary shear. It's actually sitting to the north of it and probably on a conductor that is, on a conductor that is to the north. Now, we can't explain why it is where it is, but I think we'd like to point out a couple of things that may begin to be relevant in terms of how it's there. If you look below the map there, we're looking at a cross-section of that same area, that same line through it. We're looking from a side view, from a cross-section, and we can see the depth of these deposits. On the left, if you look at the depth of the triple R in relationship to the right, where we've been making other discoveries to the right as next-gen, we seem to be operating at a common depth. The arrow, however, is a bit of an outlier in that it goes quite deep. It's very deep, as a matter of fact. Now, we don't know, we can't explain why, but it is interesting when you look at the map and you look at the shear zone. First of all, there's quite a wide gap in that zone right there. Also, as you go to the north where the deposit is, you can see that offset of the conductor that's up there. So there's obviously some sort of structural gap there, some complexity. And what's interesting when you look at it from this perspective is if you look even further north, you can see that there's a split in Hook Lake. The actual lake almost demonstrates some sort of activity that would have run through there. So we can't explain why the arrow is as deep as it is, but we certainly think it could be related in some way to those structural gaps you're seeing and in the area. So as we look at this, again, the big question is really what is the exploration potential here, and what's the potential for more discoveries as we're looking at the corridor and Patterson Lake in general. And you know, our first observation is that there's a lot of potential. And what I'll point out here is if you look at Fission's triple R on the left, you can see that within that area that represents the deposit, there's been well over 200 holes drilled there. To the left of it, to the edge of the sort of the corridor, if you will, there's been less than 20 holes. If you look at the space between the triple R and between arrow, there's been less than 20 holes drilled along that shear. Yet within the arrow deposit, as they've been defining it, there's well over 150 holes. So, despite the fact that both in the case triple R and arrow, there's a lot of work being undergone right now to focus on that deposit, get it well defined, kind of figure out how well it moves out. There is still a lot of open area between those deposits, for sure. And if you look to the right of the arrow deposit, to the area that represents the bow, harpoon, the Spitfire, etc., there's less than 100 holes been drilled in that area. So there's a lot of work yet to be done to really define and determine and see what is in there. There's a lot of potential for more, and I think this demonstrates that well. What I want to do now is kind of back up from that view and take it even further. That the previous slide really represents about the left-hand third of what you're looking at now. This is the Patterson corridor as we see it evolving and moving deeper and deeper into the basin. So now we've included the rest of our property, the Hook Lake property. We're now including Denison and ALX and Cameco's property beyond that. You'll see that the primary shear continues on, and we've interpreted it as continuing on well into the basin, at least approximately 50 kilometers. I'll point out that the shear appears to get very smooth and long as we get out into the deeper part of the basin. That's a bit of a falsehood in that the reason it's smooth and long is because there's far less information defining it as we get out there. There are geophysical surveys that have allowed us to plot and map that out there, but there hasn't been enough work done, enough drill work, enough geophysical work to really start to define the breaks, the kinks, the offsets, and the other things that will really make that line look more like what we see it on the left. The biggest challenge we run into, though, as we start to move deeper into the basin, is just that, it's the depth. All of these deposits, everything we find tends to be and will be underneath that overlying sandstone. And if you look at the cross-section beneath the map here, you can see that layer of sandstone, the orange running along it, and it does get quite deep as you move to the right. Within the boundaries of Hook Lake, Purepoint Chemical Arena property, the average depth to the bottom of the sandstone is about 200 meters. As we get into Denison and ALX project, we're looking at an average depth of more like 450 meters, And as we get beyond that to the north, it does start to fall off rather quickly. And we're looking at 700 meters of sandstone before you get down to that basement rock. Now, I just want to take it from here to where we see really some opportunity moving forward. I'm highlighting here our Hornet showing, which actually we drilled in 2013. And in that hole, we saw 138 ppmu over 2.3 meters. What we better understand now, because of the additional drilling that's been done, certainly since 2013, and more of the work that's been done, is we now understand the association between that hole and all of the other showings and discoveries that have been made to the left. And that is really how we were able to define where that primary shear was, and which of all of those conductors really was the extrapolation of the target conductor and the mineralization that we were all tapping into at that point. And from that, we sort of mapped out two areas that we think are highly prospective right now and that require a fair amount of work. One is what we're calling the Hornet target, and it really is that area that runs between Spitfire and Hornet, where we know that it's now the associated target to Spitfire, and that's an area that we'll be spending a fair amount of time on over the coming months. The other area we've called Sabre, and that's where this target area tends to move more into the Denison ALX area. And again, you start to see the complexity within the primary shear and within the conductors and the faulting that runs up through it. And what's been interesting is, sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth here, where the pink primary shear comes into that box, you'll see that it terminates at a north-south fault. We're of the opinion, and what we've seen is that it does not continue straight off to the other side onto that black conductor, but in fact is associated with where it forks to the north, and the primary shear takes off from there. So it's a very complex area. There's obviously been a lot of movement in there, and there's a lot of opportunity to move forward into that zone and dig into that. Now, back up a little bit. What I want to do, and again with these two potential target areas in mind, is start to look at, again, some of the information that we looked at the beginning. And when we're trying to determine and identify where the potential is in this entire district for new discoveries and things to progress, we've done a couple of things. One is there's now been a significant amount of drilling done in the area, and we're looking at, as they were historically as a boulder sampling, we're able to now identify boron in the sandstone anomalies, and that's what you see here mapped out in blue. Is that boron that has typically been associated with the high levels of mineralization. And again, you can see that it's very well confined within the Patterson corridor. You can also see to the north, we're seeing that same sort of anomaly occurring in the Carter corridor, and then to the south, much to a smaller degree, but you do also see it to the south, that boron occurring to the south. The other thing we're looking at are the boulder anomalies with the uranium that we saw early in the presentation, and that's what you see here in green. These are boulder samples that we've had data for quite a while, and once again, you can see how it's associated with the area. The anomalies you're looking at in green have been considered to be sourced from the Patterson corridor to some degree, and they lead us back there once more. And then finally, all the lake bottom sediment work that was done historically, and you see that there in pink, once again shows that we're seeing that uranium showing up along the corridor to the north and the south and the other two corridors, but definitely there appears to be a lot of potential for additional mineralization right along the corridor. Now, it does look somewhat congested here in terms of all the results we're showing you and where they sit. But I should point out that to the left of that map, where we get out of the basin, where we get beyond that dotted line, historically historically it wasn't understood that there even could be deposits out there. So most of the work was relegated to within the basin, which is why we have data there and we don't have data in other places. As you move further into the deeper parts of the basin to the right, because of the depth of the sandstone, you're not likely to see the same sort of indicators showing up on surface, showing up in boulders, showing up in lake bottom sediment. So again, we have less data to go by as we get deeper because we don't have those indicators showing up on surface. And what we do have there in terms of the boron comes purely from a very small number of drill holes that were put down out in that end. So at this point, I think what we're doing, or what we want to do, is kind of summarize where we are and where we think the opportunity is. Again, standing back and looking at the entire corridor and this entire district and what potential there is. Right now at the bottom, you can see where we've divided, kind of put a line down, and that's just beneath Hornet. So it's sort of the furthest most discovery, if you will. So if we look between the current discovery zones from Hornet all the way to the other side of the Triple R, there's been a little more than 450 holes drilled within 18 kilometers of strike length. Beyond that, there's only been 5 holes really of testing along the shear, along that 32 kilometers of strike length of that shear. So there's a significant amount of work ahead of us to really start to open this up and see where it can see where it can go. So to break it down and to summarize, I think outside the basin, in the shallower areas or areas where there's very little sand cover and where the current deposits and resources are being identified, I think there's still a significant amount of drilling that can be done to start to define those deposits further, to expand them, to fill in those gaps, and see what in fact does lie in that area. As we move out into the shallow areas of the basin, where we are seeing a lot of surface indicators of mineralization through the boron, through the boulders, through the lake bottom sediment, there's obviously a lot of prospective area, because the indications are that the mineralization does continue on beyond most of the current work, and there's work to be done out there. As we move into the Denison ALX scenario, through a recent transaction, we're aware that Denison will soon be doing more work out there, and it'll be interesting to see how that evolves and how we see those indicators turn into tighter targets and drill targets. When we start to move right out into the deeper basin, the area that's held there by Cameco, right now there needs to be a fair amount of geophysical work done to really start to define those targets for drilling. More EM, probably airborne work will be done out there because there's less of those surface indicators for them to rely on. But obviously that priority target, that primary shear, does carry on the basin underneath those projects, and they're certainly worthy of additional work. So that concludes what we wanted to talk through today. I hope that it's provided everybody with a better understanding of the area, a better understanding of where we came from, why we're here, why we've always been excited about this area. It's certainly all of our interest has predated the last 5 years because there's always been indications that this has been an area that held a lot of promise, and it's certainly proven that it does. Hopefully now you've learned a little bit about the history and why we're there. I think the more recent history we're all somewhat aware of, but what we can see is that this whole area does expand well beyond our Spitfire discovery or the Triple R deposit or any of the findings along this area. This is turning into a major area where it's quite evident and obvious that there will be more discoveries and more information to be found, and more uranium to be found, quite frankly, over the coming seasons and the coming years. Two things I wanted to mention at this point. We have put together most of these, the primary maps and slides we put together in a poster. that you should be able to see here in a moment. And we'll be everybody who's been participating with us here today. We'll be sending this off to getting it emailed out to you very shortly. We will also email you out the presentation with some text associated with it as we move forward. Oops, there we go. And we'll get those out in the next day or so. So please look for that in your email. And then finally, if anybody has any questions, and I do apologize that we're not going to open this up for questions today. It just became a little bit too difficult to choreograph it in real time. But please do send any questions you have to Patrick. You'll see his email there up on the screen right now. And he will make sure, and we will make sure that those questions get answered quickly. And what we want to do is take the questions and those answers. We will compile them, and we will send everybody off those questions and answers over the coming week, just to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to see what sort of questions did arise out of this presentation and where those answers took us. So by all means, please send us your questions. Please send us any information you'd like to know. If there's anything we've got here that interests you that you'd like to see more detail on, by all means, give us a call. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope this was helpful or useful, or gave everybody a bit of a broader understanding and appreciation for what is currently going on in that side of Saskatchewan. So again, thank you, and I hope everybody has a good day, and I'm sure we'll see you in the coming months.